brilliant here, just absolutely brilliant, it really is. I don't think I would like to move away, never move away.
The quay was focal, and I would guess that in previous years almost everything that came into St Mawes came in via the quay, via the water, because the roads were rubbish.
And this was, as Rob said, was a meeting place. Originally it wasn't one quay, there were 3 or 4 quays along here, if you go back in time, but that would have been the centre of the quays for village things. It replaced the village square, if you like.
If we go back to the times of St Mawes and Bahella, the wall that separates, well, it's on the edge of the co-op, between there and what was Leslie Ferris's house.
Yep.
There was a wall there, so this was not road,
No.
it was quay space. And the back lane that goes round the back of the village and comes out by the Victory, that was the main road for donkey and cart. I remember very well the characters that were on this quay plying their trade. Peter the Viking, an ex square rig captain, had a vessel called, help me out Dave,
I can't remember the name of the vessel.
Mary something. They used to ply out of Penzance to somewhere up north, bringing down coal and taking back oranges. And he came here, he used to live in Truro, he would come and bring his boat, the Viking, here, and then take passengers out. And then he would disappear over to the Place Manor in the evening and sleep there. He slept there for about 3 or 4 months. And he had a big beard, and he was a terrific character. And there was Sonny Bryant, Bert Green, Tommy Clode, Smokey, and all these characters that just were here, rather larger than life. And St Mawes, I think we forget that package holidays didn't exist in the early 60s. So this was Mecca. Yeah. Mecca was St Mawes. Mecca was as far south as you got. And so we as youngsters enjoyed every 2 weeks we got different people to come in. And as we got older, that got more colourful.
Well, we had a boating business, and I worked for my dad from about 10 up until I was 19. And I spent all my time down on the harbour. Growing up, I used to get one of our motorboats and go over to Falmouth for fish and chips. Must have been about 13 probably.
13 or 15,
yeah,
something
13,
like that.
14. I used to, if my dad had a few drinks, I thought I'm safe to take the boat over, and he didn't know I'd even taken it. My dad would be in the pub to get business, because a lot of it was done in the pub. Of course, in the summer months, he would have a few too many, and then there'd be hell up.
He was a character.
Yeah, he was a character, my dad was. Tommy Clode. Yeah, he was a character. My mum used to knit his jumpers for him, always had polo net jumpers, blue or white.
Summer holidays, I was out in the boat, and when I got about 10 years old, Tony Tiddy, myself, and Roger Tiddy, we used to let out the work for Tommy Clode and Bert Green and let out their self-drive motorboats. Used to get £0.50 a week for that. You'd go over first thing in the morning and get the fuel for them. They nearly all had Stuart Turner engines, 2-stroke engines, so you would just go over and say to Mr. Roberts, I want 2 gallons of Stuart Turner mixture, please. And then when the people came down, you would show them how to start the engine. And very often you get a 6pence or a shilling tip. And it used to be very good in the summer.
My grandfather, actually, Matthew Pascoe Saul, he was called, he lived here originally, and then I think he was in the Navy, so they were in Portsmouth. My father and the whole family were in Portsmouth. And then when he came back, he worked on one of the ferries called the Gerrans. And he used to be down in the engine room, because that was what he was, an engineer. And he used to have everything so sparkling down there, and he used to want me to go and have a look, when I was young, to see how all the brass was sparkling. And I expect there'll be a few other people that will remember him. And they used to have the old boats to take you out when the tide was out. Very big, heavy things. And then you used to have to clamber up onto the ferry. And they did actually go from the quay to St Anthony and then they went up the river to Pecule in those days.
Out of school, straight down the hill, straight into the harbour every day. Fabulous. As children, we all the local lads and girls, I guess, all seemed to have little, what we call pram dinghies. So we was in the water all day, every day, swimming or rowing, in the summer, of course. And in the winter, we would spend a lot of time on the beaches looking for washed up bits and pieces, that wreckage as we would call it.
We were in and out of the water in the summer all the time, and we had a small dinghy. And I remember being here during the war when very few people had cars, so we walked everywhere.
I was born in St Mawes, and my grandmother was the local estate agent, and we were a big family, and we enjoyed all getting together, especially on the beaches around the harbour. As girls, we weren't allowed to go into the water until we had an adult with us, and the boys were allowed to do what they liked. But that was life at that time, and we enjoyed ourselves. We could play. We were free to walk along the road and know that nobody would come, and no stranger would come, because we knew everybody.
I lived in the building up there from the age of 2, which is the building that's above what's now the chemist and what was the man shop. Anyway, the four shops just past the garage, and so my bedroom window was outside, looking just literally across the water. So at the age of 5 I could row, and then I learnt to sail and then had my own boats, and used just to muck around on the water. And then I ended up making a living out of buying and selling fish. So water's always had quite a lot to do with my youth and also my later years.
Everybody went in the carnival. That was a real village thing. Fairy queen choosing, carnival queen choosing, and we all used to go to the dances. And I think in those days for fairy queen there was what, 7 or 8, 10 little ones going in for fairy queen. I was carnival queen. My sister was 61, I think, and I was 1962. And she went to put the crown on my head, and she's boom. We used to do the Flora dance. We were taught to do that at school with Mrs. Collins, but none of the boys would join in, so we were all girls doing the Flora dance through the village, and some of us had blue skirts and some had pink skirts for boys and girls. Follow the band on the procession of the carnival, and the guests in the hotels that were up on the veranda would chuck money down onto the lorries.
It was always the highlight of the kids' our year. It was the tide would come in, and all the punts would be born inside. There'd be a long rope attached from the toll house through to the Idle Rocks, and everybody would moor up.
And I mean, you couldn't sit here, you couldn't stand here because of the rows of local people. It was a marvellous atmosphere.
The carnival was in the evening. The sports and that was in the afternoon. Swimming,
Rowing.
greasy pole,
Yeah.
diving for plates. We used to have a barge in alongside, and in those days they used to dredge the harbour quite often. Of course it was quite deep, so when it was high tide they'd throw the plates in, and then they would dive off the barge and pick up the plates. Of course the one who picked up the most plates was the winner.
Half a crown.
Yeah, whatever it was.
I did the rowing. Nobody could touch me.
No, I think Maureen might have been the only one that
Yes,
could have.
Maureen might have done,
Yeah.
yeah. We had to have to go from the barge by the pier down in front of the Idle Rocks, turn around the buoy, back again. Yeah.
A lot of people used to get thrown overboard and used to have flower fights. People were getting wet and covered with flower bombs themselves, and that got stopped, but that played a big part of these celebrations and that going on.
All the boats were sunk. You never finished a race because all the boats were sunk, and it was good fun. Flower bombs going around, and just wonderful memories. Yeah.
I've seen those cabins lift and go up in the air 6 or 7 feet in the storm. It's just, the power of the water is incredible, isn't it?
Spring tide,
Yeah.
southeast wind, lethal. Because for some reason you would think it was southwest, but it isn't, it's southeast. and it would bring in large rollers. The tide would be kept high, normally on a high pressure, so the water would be slightly higher. If you get a spring tide, just lethal.
John was in the fire brigade, and I think they were out for 36 hours or 48 non-stop, and they came up through the front street, and as they went round the corner the road disappeared. Fire engine went over and the road disappeared. Sea wall stayed there, but the road disappeared, so they were lucky the fire engine didn't go down as well.
I can just remember sort of lying in bed and hail and hitting the windows, and there was a time when we lived in the watch house over there, and so the sea would come over the wall and bash the house as well.
Was it 62, the big gale? 63?
63, just before
My mother and
here.
father had a habit of going across to south of France. I remember my father had just come back from across the channel, and it was pretty horrible weather. And I was up in the window up there as a little lad, and I looked and said to my mother, "I think that wall's going to go." And literally with that bang, and the sea wall collapsed. And my father spent most of the night with a table with a blanket over it, pushing against the plate glass windows on the shop there when the seas came in. And luckily for him and for me, the weather and the way it hit went around, so we didn't get too much of it. But the next day, Edmund's shop, which is up there, had it was holes everywhere. It was
collapsed. Part of that collapsed. Yeah.
My father was a local fireman in those days, and he tells a story of that they was trying to shore up the shop fronts, and there was one shop there that we knew as Edmunds's, and one of the young firefighters was picked up in the shop by a wave, taken back across the road into the sea, and then came back in on the next one, and they grabbed him, secured him and carried on.
It came right up, and it's quite a spread, the house. It came up about 40 feet back into the house, the waves, and my father ended up floating on one of the doors with the water. It was absolutely awful. It was heartbreaking, and it destroyed what they'd worked with for years. And I can remember one of the freezers floating on in the next door's grocer's shop as well. That's how bad it was. Yeah, we were just told to go upstairs and just get in the bed and just cover your ears. That's all you could do. It was really, really bad.
My auntie worked for a chap called Chester for many years in a little gift and shoe shop, and I come from the primary school down the hill, and I couldn't get into the front of the shop hardly. And then by the time it was time to shut up shop, my mother would finish work. I think she was still working at Johnston's where the Onda was. She used to pick me up, and we used to have to go through what Rob's just said was back lane, at the back of those buildings, round the old black galvanised shed that's now where the arcade and all is, and then over the small stream into the car park on the back of the Rising Sun to get to Polvarth, because you just couldn't get through along. It was just water, many a time black, pitch black and water.
We dug this lot up. The boundary to St Mawes is that. There's the gutter that run down the front of the Victory Inn and come across into the sea here. This is St Mawes, that isn't. So the last building in St Mawes is Shipman Castle Hotel. And the other name for Shipman Castle Hotel is the Town Arms, because it's a ship and it's a castle, which is the arms of St Mawes.
Oh, there's too many stories about the Shipman Castle. There was a film made called, I think it was called Ship Ahoy. A lot of the filming was done right where we are now. And the Shipman Castle was certainly in the movie a lot. So we had a few film stars, as they were in their days, staying there, and I remember a couple of the local lads. I was very young, I was only about 7 or 8 years old at the time, but some of the lads a bit older than me, one who springs to mind was Douglas Clode. I'm pretty sure at the time was paid a handsome sum to ferry some of the film crew in and out of the harbour, but part of the deal was he had to go and see Judith's dad first
Get his haircut.
and get his hair cut.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I can remember.
Great on that one, Judy.
He must have loved it because they all hated having their hair cut, especially by my father anyway. My father used to put a plank across the seat for the boys to sit on. And I've got a picture of Robert Wing sitting on that seat with my father.
During the war, both the ship and castle and the Isle of Rocks, they were requisitioned. So Americans and other people used them. I do remember my father telling me at the beginning of the war, quite a lot of old people from the East End were evacuated down here, and there was one old woman, she washed her wig and put it out on her windowsill, and a gull came down and took it away. And she was in a terrible state.
Remember where those doors are, there was a little takeaway which was very rarely open apart from carnival days, with a lady called Margot selling the hot dogs, and we used to get quite, man, sometimes she used to get one or two of them for free and that, if she was lucky, but
Alan was right, there was a window on the left there and a little room inside. The entrance to the ship bar was this side at one time, when I first come here, and that was the old bar. I was the last person to run it, and I was one of the few who spoke English when I moved into it. All the staff in the village then were Italians. Peter Hitchens was great because he was the only person who could speak Italian, which he learnt in the army, and gave him a job set up for the rest of his life.
A bit of an anecdote, just my late uncle, who was a London stockbroker, came, he's come down in the early 50s. My mother was called Margie. He said, "Margie, I can't understand it," he said. "I've just paid £20 for a bottle of Domaine de la Romanée-Conti." And he said, "It's far too bloody good to put at the other end of the table, so I bought some other stuff. And I've made sure I've got the other dozen, because it's worth a bloody sight more than that." So, you know, some of the best wines of the world actually used to be available here. But the St. Mawes, the hotels, the Isle of Rocks was always the pucker one, and the Ship and Castle was a bit, was more of a budget. But Harley Moseley was a damn good operator. He had 4 hotels.
There was one thing about him as well. If you lived in the village, you needn't go out of a job in winter. He would always give you a job, and he knew where you'd been. I mean, the fishermen obviously couldn't fish in the winter then, or the boatmen who run the boats here couldn't. They'd go and work in there. Sonny, Bert and all that worked in the ship. And so I met them all, really. It was great moving into a village where everybody was working.
I had an uncle who moved to the village, and he moved, as far as I'm aware, he moved to the village to be the projectionist, because they had a cinema in the back there, where the ballroom was.
Yes, they did.
Cinema at the back of the Ship and Castle?
No, I can recall that now. It was a big ballroom, it was lovely, it was done out beautifully. The floor was lovely. Can you remember it, Jenny?
No.
No, you can't. No. All sorts of things, dances and bands and what a village does.
I mean, the back of here was staff accommodation. Mo had property everywhere, along the front, over there, wherever you went. Mo had, I think at one time there's 30-something properties, not that he owned, but that he used for staff, really.
Harley Moseley was a very clever chap. He married Zosia, who was a Polish countess. She came over and was, so I'm told, reliably from her daughter Krisha, who still lives here, that she came over and was broadcasting to the Polish troops during the war. And he came down here after the war and bought these places. But he had a marvellous marketing ploy that, you know, if it snows the snow sits in St. Mawes for over an hour, you get a 3 days accommodation. But of course, if you've got an expanse of water such as this, the chance of snow is incredibly slim.
The only time they paid out was when Mo sold it.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And it was Eagle Investments or something bought it, and it bloody was snowed at Easter. But yeah, Mo was he was an American diplomat, and he had one thing after the war that everybody wanted: dollars. So he could buy property cheap, rent property, get work done.
Before I was a member of the local fire brigade, one of the fellas who's still with us, called David Green, David had to break into the bank because they had a sofa in the customers area where you could sit, I guess, and wait your turn in the queue. And in the window, I'm not quite sure it was made, but lots of windows years ago, you used to see the piece of glass where I think they used to blow the glass, and there would be
old-fashioned.
yeah, and the sun magnified going through that and caught the sofa on fire. So he had to break into the bank to put the fire out.
Remember Walter Hitchens living on this end one?
Walter was classic. Hello, boy. What have you come for now? And he was a lovely chap.
He used to lead the band, didn't he, for the carnival and so forth. He would be very proud. Walter going through there, and he'd be at the front, and the band would be behind, and Walter would be at the front.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I was thinking of different.
That's Charlie Andrews. Charlie Andrews had a wooden leg. He lost his leg, apparently he had an accident between a pilot boat and the ship. Got his leg jammed. The story goes, whether it's true or no, I don't know. They brought him ashore here and they cut his leg off on the kitchen table. And apparently next morning he was up making this leg for himself. He was in charge of the harbour when I was a child. And from when I was a child, you could go down on the waiting room steps, which was just up the road from there, and over to the ladder. There were solid boats. You could walk from one boat to another. And we used to be cheeky to him, and he'd chase us across those boats. And believe it or not, with a wooden leg, which was just one leg, there was no joint in the middle, he would keep up with us.
It's called Manor Cottage because this, where we are here now, was Manor Quay. And I think that outdates the pier, before the pier was ever built. And that was, as I understand, the harbour master's cottage. My great-grandfather owned that. And I think, I'm pretty sure it was purchased for £50. I can tell you that the slate on the roof came from what used to be the Bry Knights Chapel halfway up the hill that had a fire, and they put it straight over the top of the thatch roof. So the thatch roof, when my father went there to live, was still inside of that. And him and his partner and great friend Jimmy Austin stripped it out, and it was a lot of mess, but he was worried about the fire hazard of leaving it in there. The entrance to the cottage used to be around the back of the three cottages that are here, because the harbour, when that cottage was built, the harbour would go right up pretty well to where the yellow lines are. So if you wanted to come out this way, you'd be straight in the harbour. So the front entrance was out the side.
I can remember the Ferris family who lived in the end cottage. There was old Mrs. Ferris who, my mother caught her on a cine film before the war. She used to come and throw her slops over the wall. And she was married to Charlie Ferris, and he got shingles at some stage in about 1950, which stopped him shaving. So he had a lovely white beard, and he was involved as an extra in lots of the films that were made down here. He was quite a character.
Charlie used to have a white beard, and he used to, when we was at the primary school, especially the younger ones like us at the time, and Charlie used to be dressing up as Father Christmas. So every time I came through the village and with my mother, I was about 4 or 5. There's Father Christmas. He is, and there he is. But he used to live up there, and he used to, hello, young man,
It was a coal store on the bottom, and on the top was sectioned off, and the fishermen's nets were stored on the top. And I mean, that's unbelievable, that building there now. You just can't imagine it, can you, as it was.
We used to go down to the coal store.
The old coal store,
yeah. And play in there and that,
Mm.
Oh yeah, it's massive, wasn't it?
We used to play a game we used to call Bucky Owl, but what it was, I can't remember how it went now, I don't know. We were playing there for hours, weren't we? Because was there 2 stories?
Yeah.
And it was quite, I mean, it was quite old and rickety, I suppose.
The boats used to come into the harbour, didn't they? And unload, and then they would drop it into the coal house.
It was called Pomeroy's Garage because the old lady who had it lived in that cottage. She had a bus, an open top bus, which she used to take people out on outings and tours and things like that. We always called it Pomeroy's Garage because she had it.
During a war, the upper part was used as a reading room for the American Red Cross. They had it there.
My mother worked there just after the war, and she said it was owned by Frank van Humbeck, who was a Dutchman. Yeah. Apparently was in the Dutch Secret Service during the war. And
at the garage?
Yeah, no, well after the war he had it, and my mother worked there, did the accounts. And I don't know when Frank sold, or whether or not it was sold to Arthur Roberts, who bought it. Yeah. But Arthur Robert had it certainly in my young years.
We played in that garage. The garage was partially tumbled down at the back because it used to be a carpenter's workshop originally up there, but the floor had long since collapsed. If people from the garage came in, they kept cars in there. You could dive out the other door. There was 2 Rolls Royces and a Pontiac, which was used for taxi work, because then they used to take the children to school from St Just to St Mawes School. Now, how many children can you say spent all their time coming to school in a taxi that was a Rolls Royce? Not very many.
I remember getting petrol there. I remember carrying petrol for Bert Green and Sonny Bryant and Tommy Cloud and the such likes who used to hire boats out, and they all had little motor boats and that. And Reg Hitchings had a little fleet of what we called speedboats. So there was always people going up and down these steps with cans of fuel.
Well, Brenda Pye, who bought the building from Mr. Mosley, I think in about 1970, she used the bottom as a workshop because she was an artist, and particularly she had a kiln that made stained glass. And upstairs, the main room had been divided up into several little rooms because Mosley had used it for his staff, and she turned it into one building. And it has an unequalled view, and I sat up there with her, and people were constantly stopping to take photographs of the petrol pumps and of the building.
Well, my first memories of knowing Brenda, I guess, once again, is back when we were very, probably 12, 13 years of age, because Brenda had a St Mawes One design that was a very successful boat called the Robin Hood.
Yes.
And she would, as a lot of other people would in those days, let young locals race their boats. And she could race too, she could sail.
Yeah,
well, she's a very, very kind lady. She's a very generous lady, really. I mean, she left the whole building to the gig club, and their heritage group has got the lease to the top bit.
There were 4 shops in here, 3 of which Chester had. The far end was called the Man Shop. Then there was my father's Jack and Margaret's. The next one was called Mary Chester had it, the Fashion Centre, and here was electricity shop.
Oh, Fraines.
Fraines.
Jerry Fraine.
Around the back where Rodney's hairdressing salon is was Leo Linden, who did all the television repairs.
Yep.
These were coal sheds down here, but Tony told me that one of the fishermen had a workplace just in the corner here, and in the other corner was a stable. But can you remember the stable, Jenny?
Now, I do know that there was a horse because, was it Mr. Penhaligon?
Yes.
He used to deliver the coal with a horse and cart, and coal would be delivered here on a sailing boat called the Donald and Doris, and would be unloaded into that old coal shed.
But the taxis from the garage used to be drive up here and go up on the upper floor, and were parked there. And then behind that, Mr. Pascoe had his workshop. You were talking about Mr. Pascoe, weren't you, Kevin?
Yeah.
He had a workshop at the top at the back.
The shops that were here then were indicative of the state of the village in that time. The gents' outfitters was there, and the ladies' outfitters was there. The rentals of televisions and electrical repairs around the back. It came. Not only do we live in a throwaway society now, but then we didn't. And electrical goods were very much more basic. I remember very well the battery Exide van used to come up and chucking a load of dry batteries into there. Exide, we don't see Exide anymore.
No, you don't.
Things of the past. It was just the village life was very different.
Self-contained. You had everything you needed to live in the village.
Even as late as the 60s.
And then on the end of that was Melville Chester had it as I think he started during the war, used to repair boots for the Americans. There was hundreds of Americans stationed around there. And then of course when they pulled it all down, they redid it as it is now. And he had a big electrical shop there, sold everything electric, televisions, he rented televisions out, anything. He had his hand in most things Melville did over the years.
He was there at the time when televisions were just beginning to be a family thing, wasn't it?
They said he had a monopoly of fitting televisions from St Mawes to Indian Queens.
We used to wait for the ferries to come in, and if there was any deliveries to be made, we used to take them over to the chemist and to the watch house and to all the businesses, and they'd give us like threepence for delivering their parcels to them. So we used to make a few bob on that when you're like 4 or 5 years of age. It's brilliant.
I think where it says Beach House, Kings Road, that used to be a house.
Yeah.
Another one of Mosley's. Yeah. He owned that one.
That's right. Yeah.
And where those drains are, there was an alleyway there. You could walk down that alleyway, and in around the back, as Judith just said, there was a shop that I recall was the Ship Shape shop.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's right. It was a chandler's, and I think they used to sell lots of clothes as well. Sort of boating stuff.
Well, I can remember it was the black
Beach Cottage.
The Beach Cottage, which was where the entrance to the little shop, which in turn before my time at least was a hall.
It was a fire station with 2 fire engines in, and next door was a big garage where visitors could put their cars in from the Idle Rocks. And that pub was called Beach Hall, where they used as a storeroom. Mosley did. It wasn't used as a functional hall.
A lot of the businesses, like local boatmen, Reggie and people like that, used to have their old boats that they were going to
downstairs in Beach Hall,
which
is where the arcade is now.
Absolutely piled up with rubbish. We used to go in there as kids and get hell to go, because we used to keep hiding in there and just generally lurking around, and then somebody would, one of the hotel management would come in and play hell with you and get us all out again. But we'd all climb back through little slits at the back.
It was on the beach, this building, until about 1904, when part of the development of this road included building a wall round here, and the big mover in this was a chap called Edwin Hicks, and they had a great dinner in his honour. Because this was on the beach and it was lower down, it's liable to flooding.
My first ever call as a fireman was to this place, flooded. Which, when it was a Coast Guard station, it was ideal, because they could almost float the boat out sometimes.
In 1944, old Mrs. Tiddy, the estate agent, came to my father and said she was putting a watch house on the market at 12 o'clock. This was earlier. Did he want it? And so he and my mother did a lot of sums, and they decided, yes, they could manage to buy it. So they bought this building. During the war, the cafe, which was in through that door, it was a naffy, but I think Americans must have been there, because I remember being in, and we put all the chairs upside down on the tables, and we were chiselling off the chewing gum, which was on the undersides of the chairs.
But my auntie and uncle had it, well, it got requisitioned by the Americans because they used to have the tea rooms here.
Yeah.
They used to own it before then.
Before the war.
Yeah, so that's why Granny Tiddy must have had it for sale. Yeah.
We were able to move the surgery out of our house into the watch house, and people remember coming to the surgery when it was there.
I can remember the wooden staircase.
Yeah, I certainly
Can you
remember.
remember? Yeah, and I can remember the waiting room at the back.
Yeah.
There was a little waiting room, wasn't there? But it was like a smell, not a doctor's smell, but it was the wood smell. I could going up those wooden, yeah.
Our local doctor who brought me into the world had a surgery there. Again, it's one of those buildings I've passed a million times and you never think anything about it. Some people can up the stage and go here or there and everywhere, but I couldn't be anywhere else. You'd never get me away from here. You'd never get me away.